What's good, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm actually going to change things up. It's not going to be a deck profile or anything like that. Today, we're actually going to be reading over the post-Genesis Championship August points update. I really appreciate how they're doing these points updates and giving us sort of the explanations all in one post. I know they had split it up a while ago and then finally started doing it all together. So without further ado, let's get through this. I'm not going to bother with reading the entire text blocks here, but it is, I definitely think, worth checking out the page and going through, on your own as well, or just pausing and reading. However, just sort of starting things off with the first points update is number 86 Heroic Champion Rongo Miniad going from 68 to 100 points. I do think it's funny. They had the inverse of 86 is 68 for the points. However, I am so happy this card is now 100 points. In my opinion, any of these Floodgate cards that just, say don't let your opponent play the game should just be 100 points. And in fact, there are, a couple of cards missing from this list that I really feel like should have gone to 100, but it's fine. We can keep going. Now, we're getting to some of the Blitzclick hits. Blitzclick, by far, was the most represented deck. I don't think it was the best deck. However, I do think that it, being so popular as it was and being as cheap as it was, I want to say the entire engine you could get away with 39 points, giving you so much room for non-engine, that I'm really happy that they ended up putting a lot more points on this engine. Whisker going to 6, it was a 3 of. It probably still will stay a 3 of. They just might have to move around their non-engine. Whisker is just such a good card. And then I am happy that Thunderclap Monk is going to 9 points. It's basically the Kwakimeru Guardian. However, you can freely special summon it on your opponent's turn. Thanks to Crackle. Anyway, just I'm really happy that it's up to 9 points as a turn 0 monster negate. Lightning Rod Lord, not entirely sure, but I'm happy it's up to 1 point. Continuing on, we get to the Fairy Tale point adjustments. Snow going from 85 to 10. I think this is most definitely one of the largest point changes that they've done for a very good card, a very playable card. However, in my opinion, Fairy Tale Snow going down to 10 points, it's perfectly fine. I've never been an issue with the interactions that Fairy Tale Snow offers, unless you're, in a grass looks greener deck, you've completely milled your entire deck, and Snow just has infinite fodder with cards that like to be banished. So I think Fairy Tale Snow going down to 10 is perfectly fine for Genesis. And then it looks like the rest of the Fairy Tale cards, some of the more important ones, are definitely getting some points allocated. I don't know how I feel about some of these new decks starting off with such low point costs and then the next update getting more. However, I think the way that this sort of shakes out, it's perfectly fine. Match Guru going to 5, Wiccat, which is their best XYZ, goes to 10, and Ball, which is the field spell, I want to say, also going to 10, perfectly fine. It definitely means, less points towards non-engine, but I'm perfectly okay with these two decks getting a lot more points assigned to them. Therion King Regulus went up to 33 points. It is a generic Omni Negate as long as you have a machine in the grave to summon it. It's searchable off of the rank 8, the Gigantic Champion Sargass. So I think it getting some more points assigned to it is just fine, or I would be fine with them, allocating a little bit more points towards the Sargass, especially because you can rank it up from a Merrymaker. So realistically, any rank 4 deck could get to Regulus. But overall, just happy it's getting more points as it's just a generic Omni Negate. Going down, we get to the Tellarknight card. So obviously, Rongo Miniad got points thanks to it winning the Central American Genesis Championship. But now the rest of the Tellarknight cards are also getting points. Not anything too crazy. Vamano is just a generic rank 5 monster negate. It going up to 10 is fine. I think there's a suite of cards that are in that same exact kind of vein of being semi-generic extra deck options for negates. So 10 is perfectly fine. And then the rest of these point adjustments, I think they're just boxing out some of the just some of the more degenerate combos that you could do. The one thing that I can't help but notice that I believe is missing from this entire list is Artifact Mjolnir and Infernal Princess Quinqueree. I don't know what Konami's thinking by not pointing those cards. Those are floodgates. They should be taken out back, just like the rest of them. Then we get to Melfi, a deck very close to my own heart. And oh no, Godmommy is 2 points and Footsteps is now 2 points. I wasn't even playing the staring contest. This is perfectly fine. You can still play this deck just as fine as you could before. And then we get to the deck that immediately sort of ended up removing, or immediately ended up dating my Sacred Beast video. So Calamity, so the Hamon, the Spell Searcher, goes to 2 points. Raviel goes to 2 points. Martyr goes from 2 to 3. Thunderclap goes from 2 to 3. Overall, I think that this is fine. The deck goes from having 17 points towards the engine now up to 35 if you want to play it the way that it has seen success. So maybe it sees a little less play as an engine and a little bit more it's just a pure deck. And I'm always okay with the deck just being played pure. I don't want everything having access to a rank 10 Omni Negate just because these cards were cheap. So overall, this is perfectly fine. And then Gustav Max getting put up to 10 points. I want to say this is the 2000 burner. Overall, I mean, burn as a mechanic is not always a very interesting play style, so I'm glad that this is getting points. And then Nerva goes from 5 to 6 points. That's fine. Then we get down to Crystron and the Elf Note Crystron, just getting a little bit more points added on. I do think Crystron is a very powerful set of cards that is a little bit underpointed for what it is. It wasn't too long ago that we saw Crystron with K9 doing a lot of degenerate things in Advanced. So overall, I'm fine with this getting a little bit more points thrown on. Sylfefnir is a 2 to 3 of Tristaros. I mean, it could be anywhere from 1 to 3, but this 2 points is not going to break the bank. And then we get to some of these random Elf Note cards, Tinia and Lucina. I think overall just small point adjustments is fine as long as cards like Regina, I want to say, are 40 points. Then we get to Clown Crew Flare. Once again, another deck very, very close to me. I really enjoyed playing Clown Crew, especially the fairy variant of it. However, since we got that point adjustment for the Heralds, it is significantly harder to play. Especially if you can't play a lot more of the generic non-engine that the deck really likes, like Nibiru. This only, adds on to that. I think from 0 to 5, honestly, is probably fine. The one thing that's upsetting for me is Clown Crew in Advanced only really sees play with Mitsurugi, and I really like the ability to play Clown Crew sort of as its own deck in Genesys, and this just makes that harder to happen. But I still think that there's some more cooking that can happen with this deck. Then we get to a little bit about Pear Bear Scare, which was a very popular card in the Genesys Championships, but they basically say because of the play rate and because of the way that the card works, they want to keep it at 0 for now, especially as, some of the time the card will just do nothing. I think it is very much one of those cards that's a fun mind game. I wouldn't mind seeing it go up to like 1 point just to, give it something. I think that there's a room in this format that we can have more just random non-engine just be 1 point, so you have to try and squeeze it in, and it isn't just an auto-include. Speaking of cards that are just 1 point, DD Crow now goes to 2. I understand why, in the argument that I just said, we don't want everything being 0 points, and I feel like this is just DD Crow, so saw a lot of play as it's, overall a good card. I don't think it needs to go to 2. Then we get to some of the more generic cards, I'll say. 7 Tachyon went to 11 points. This is something that should have happened from the get-go. Their argument was you have to put a card back and it does XYZ lock you for the rest of the turn. And I never really believe that should be the case, why it should remain 0. I think good cards that see play in Advanced probably shouldn't just be 0 points in Genesys. I think that bringing it up to 11 points is fine, especially with some of the other generic cards that we'll see later. So I'm fine with it going to 11 points finally. I didn't like it being free for so long. And I can't help but notice that this comes relatively soon after it was reprinted, but we'll hold Konami aside for that. Then we get to A Hero Lives from 0 to 8. It just says special summon a monster from deck. I think that realistically we should have this apply to more cards in the game. If it's just a free card that says special something from deck, it should have some points to it, especially given how popular hero cards are and how many of them could be used for rank 4 spam like they have been in the past. This next 2 set of cards, I completely disagree with being the points that they are. Royal Archfiend going from 0 to 7 and Usurpation going from 0 to 3. These are cards that don't see play in Advanced. You can do a lot of cute things with these cards. You can bridge them into the Ritual of Light and Darkness cards, and I'm sad that this kind of boxes that out as a viable strategy. You can still use them for other things, but I really like this as an engine option for those cards. And then you also use them in decks like for Genesys. It has Genesys in the name. There's no way we can keep we can keep these pointed. Continuing on, now we get to the generic searchers. Now, this is something that might be a little bit contentious, but in my opinion, card or decks should be consistent. Like in my opinion, the best thing that this format allows for is for us to curve the power level of decks. I don't necessarily think we should always adjust the consistency of it. I've never liked consistency hits. I feel like more cards should either be, banned or at 3, not necessarily limited or semi-limited. Even if they're like a non-once per turn, they can get you to something else. I just feel like if they're not easy, like, they should be accessible for players. So, for example, Bonfire goes from 33 to 15. That is very important. You can now play an extra copy of Bonfire in any deck that was already playing 1. Chaos Space goes from 40 to 13, which now means you can play 3 of in anything that you could only play 1 of before. Chaos Space is a card that I love. I loved playing it in Bestial Fiendsmith, playing like a Chaos Dragon package. I think Chaos Space is such a fun card to play with, and all it's doing is getting you to other cards in the deck. And if there's something that pops up that is a problematic card, we just point those cards. We don't necessarily have to, hit consistency. Deep Sea Aria, I think, adds a Sea Serpent from deck to hand at the cost of like banishing a Water from Grave. Like, I didn't even realize this was 40 points. I think it's fine. E-Telling, this is a little bit different. It's definitely special summoning a monster from deck. There's a lot you can do with that. So I'm fine that they're decreasing it a little bit, just so, we can try it out. But once again, it's one of those cards that, summons something from deck, and I think that those should always be watched out for a little bit. Continuing on, we have Fire Formation Tanky from 35 to 11. So now you can play 3 and you still have 2 additional points to spare. I think Tanky is another one of those examples that it should be accessible for decks to play. From Fossil Dig goes from 33 to 18. Fossil Dig is a little bit different. It can get you to Misk, and I know that there's some math around here with Fossil Dig between, being able to access Miscellaneous Saurus. But once again, if Misk is a problem, we just increase the points for that. Lone Fire Blossom should never have been 33 points. Yes, it accesses any plant from the deck at the cost of your normal summon, and then tributing it, and that is at ignition effect speed, and we'll lose to so many different cards that it should be 10. Then we get to 1-for-1 and Original Sinful Spoils Snake Eye. So 1-for-1 is basically OSS, except OSS is searchable and can get you to more things. So I'm fine with this sort of point math of OSS being 17 and 1-for-1 being 19. I definitely think this gives more room for Snake Eye cards to be playable. Without access to links, Snake Eye monsters, they're perfectly fine. You might flood the board with a bunch of level 1s, but the rank 1 pool is very limited at the moment that I'm completely okay with these cards being as low pointed as they are. Then we get to Quick Launch. It summons a monster from deck. So following that same train of, Quick Launch being 25, E-Tele being 25, Hero Lives is 8. I feel like there's a little bit of bias there, but perfectly fine. Reinforcement of the Army goes from 33 to 18. Once again, generic searchers, you should be able to access whatever warrior you're trying to get to. If there's a warrior problem, we increase the points on that. Terraforming goes from 33 to 20. There are plenty of decks like ABC that want to be able to access their field spell easily. I'm perfectly fine with letting them be able to do that. Next up, we're going to get to a couple more decks and sort of their point adjustments. I'm going to go through these a little bit quicker, but you have Phantom Knight cards going down in points, which I think is fine. You only have Breaksword going up to 1 point. That's perfectly fine. Phantom Knights aren't doing anything too degenerate, and they don't even have Rusted Bardiche, so. Boreas Storm, the Wicked Wind, going from 20 to 15. I can't even tell you why this card is pointed. I think it's perfectly fine. Sword Soul Emergence, once again, we're finally fixing some of those Sword Soul hits. Diagram going from 10 to 5 is a little bit problematic, but without True Draco being able to play any of the floodgates they were playing before, I think it's fine for them to have a little bit more consistency in points. Tour Guide going from 3 to 0, never should have been 3 points anyway. Garunix Eternity, King of the Fire Kings going from 0 to 3, Ponix going from 10 to 7, and Kieran going from 7 to 5. I think these point adjustments finally make Fire King, like, playable. Like, we can actually play these cards. The point allocation, now I think we have enough space to play a second Volcanics, and we just don't play Pot of Prosperity, but I think we're finally at the point where we can play Fire Kings again, which is one of my favorite decks. It got me my invite last season to Nationals. I want to be able to play this deck again. Goblin Biker cards going down in price, that's perfectly fine. Officiator of Doom Samuel, I want to say that's the rank 6 zombie card. I don't know why this was even 10 points. Thunder Crash Snarecrow was, they received our criticism and put it back down to 0. This is, I don't agree with. Happy Memory going from 0 to 2. I think this was a Blitz Click counter, but it should not be any points. Per Lily going from 7 to 5, perfectly fine. And then we get to some of the Shaddoll adjustments. I'm perfectly okay with all of these cards. They all go in the correct direction. Winda going from 60 to 100. It's the Floodgate. Get it out of here. App Clone going from 10 to 1. Perfectly fine. Lev Shaddoll Fusion, which dumps the App Clone, which gets you to Shaddoll Fusion. These are all numbers I'm okay with. Shaddoll Fusion being one of the best board breaker cards you could have access to, going to 3 points is perfectly fine with me. And then, Schism now being 1 point, also lovely. Then we get to Pot of Desires going from 15 to 10. This is a little bit different than the consistency cards we saw before. I don't necessarily know if I agree with the pot cards going down, because in some cases, this is just a +1 for decks that it doesn't bother. And I feel like there's a difference between getting to the card that you want in your deck versus just getting more cards. But we'll see how this one shakes out. And then Raigeki going from 4 to 2, that's perfectly fine. Overall, I'm really happy with this points update. It finally gives us the ability to play a lot more generic cards. All of the other cards throughout this update for specific engines, in my opinion, they're going in the right direction. I don't think that there's anything here that necessarily is going in the wrong direction. So overall, happy with this points update and hoping for the best of Genesys format. Let me know what you think of the points update in the comment section down below, and have a great rest of your day.